Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Unit 4, Day 1. Today's journal, I'd like for you to answer this question. Do you feel more allegiance or loyalty to your region, Hickory or Newton, or wherever you're from, your state, North Carolina, obviously where we're at now, but if you grew up in a different state, that's fine, or your country, the United States, or if you grew up in another country, that country? How do you associate these with your identity, and what does it mean to you to be an American? Just want you to answer those few simple questions, and that will lead us into our topic for today. Now, today we're going to be talking about nationalism and sectionalism, and this will be the first day of notes in our new unit, the era of growth and disunion. All right, so we're going to be talking a lot about American expansion, a lot about the growth of America, but also about how it's divided and it's beginning to be drawn almost physically in the sand, a line between those who believe one thing and those who believe another. Now, the first topic is nationalism. This time period in our society was called the era of good feelings following the War of 1812. Some of the reasons for that was we were very successful in the War of 1812. We had finally pushed the British off of our shores and back to England. Our economy is going to start booming under the Henry Clay American system. There's also a huge boost in federal power from the judiciary, and American art and literature are flourishing during this time. And for the first time, in fact, because before this we didn't have American art and literature, we just had British art and literature and European art and literature. Now, the first thing we need to do when talking about nationalism is define what is a nation. And a nation is a large group of people unified by common descent, history, culture, or language, living in a particular area. Now, we have a much broader definition of nation in today's society. I think of Raider Nation or Junior Nation if you're a NASCAR fan and you love Dale Jr. But there's all these nations that we've created that are not really what we would consider a quote unquote nation like a country. What we're talking about is a country, and nationalism is a loyalty or devotion to your nation. So, why was nationalism on the rise? We already talked about that because of all of those reasons there listed on the right. Now, the second thing we're going to talk about is sectionalism. If there's a loyalty to a country, there's also a loyalty to a more specific area, and that is where sectionalism comes in. And it is a devotion, or more specifically, an exaggerated devotion or allegiance to the interest of a region. So, in this case, North versus South. Some had an allegiance to the South and where they grew up in the South. Some had an allegiance to the North. Now, in defining this, sectionalism, let's talk about a region. A region is a part of a country or of the world having definable characteristics, but not always a fixed boundary. All right. So, for example, if any of you play sports at the high school, we're in the West Regional during playoffs. Okay, that's because we're in the West region. Now, there's no specific line that defines that we're in the West, but it's generally somewhere around about Greensboro-ish. But there is no set line. We're just in this Western region. If we played in the East Regional, it's because we were in the East, and we were in the East region. All right. Some reasons why these regions are being divided and why people are beginning to show a devotion to a specific area is number one, there's a difference in economies, and we've talked about that extensively. The North is very industrial. They're beginning to shift more into textiles and new things that have come over from Europe, and factories are starting to grow. The South is much more dedicated to agriculture, and they're going to continue to be dedicated to agriculture all the way into the Civil War. There's also obviously the issue of slavery, which was a huge contention leading to the Civil War. There's differences in population growth. You have tons of immigration coming in through New York and in places in the Northeast. In the South, it's still really rural. There's not a lot of development of cities and growth. And that's going to be kind of some of the reasons why you see the southern regions and the northern regions beginning to divide and that quote-unquote sectionalism starting to form. Now, one of the main things going on during this time that's going to add to the sectionalism is the Adams-Onis Treaty. If you remember right, we had the Louisiana Purchase. All right, Thomas Jefferson purchased all that land in the Louisiana Territory. Well, now we're going to settle our disputes with Spain, and we're going to put a line through America that says, hey, this is ours, that's Spain's. That way there's no issue anymore between us and Spain, as well as we're going to also get Florida as a part of this treaty. So essentially, just like we did with the Louisiana Purchase, we're going to give them $5 million. They give us some western lands and establish a border, and they give us Florida. Now, if you take a look at this map, this is going to kind of encompass all of what we've talked about in American history. We have the territory there with Great Britain in 1783 that we get after the Revolution. Then you have the Louisiana Purchase. You have British ceding some land in 1818. Florida and a little bit of land being ceded there in purple in the Spanish cession in the Adams-Onis Treaty. Then you're going to have what we talk about with the annexation of Texas, which will be later on in the unit, the Mexican cession, and so on and so on. And all of these are things that we're going to talk about as we continue going through this unit. Now, a key term that you need to know when we come out of Unit 4 is the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine was put into place in 1823 by President James Monroe. And James Monroe is pretty much going to push this doctrine through the course of his presidency. And what it meant was that no individual, okay, whether it was Europe, France, Spain, pick a major power during this time, they had no right to colonize anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. And so essentially, in short, it told Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, and we will stay out of the European affairs, or the Eastern Hemisphere. We'll stay away from you if you stay away from us. And James Monroe had done most of the work on the Monroe Doctrine, or had done a lot of the work on the Monroe Doctrine, but a huge portion of it was done by John Quincy Adams, his Secretary of State. And you're going to see John Quincy Adams' role in this once again push another person from the position of Secretary of State into the presidency, the same as James Monroe had been Secretary of State under James Madison. Okay, there's a lot of correlation there. If you were Secretary of State, like I said, you were pretty much going to be the next in line to the president. Now, here's a famous political cartoon of the Monroe Doctrine, and you're going to see the Monroe Doctrine used time and time again throughout the last half of the 19th century on into the 20th century. Now, after every war, it seems like there's always a panic. And especially after the War of 1812, where we had this huge economic boom and huge economic expansion because we're, beginning to, whether it's making clothes, or trying to manufacture food, and or grow food, I should say, and manufacture things. Now we've got an economic downturn because we don't need all those things. And as a result, banks begin to fail, farmers are losing their land, low prices are leading to less manufacturing in the north, and there's a ton of foreign competition for goods because not only do we need money, but these European countries are still trying to send over, ships and trade and all those things. Because if you go back 40 years, the issue with France and Britain wasn't that they cared really that much about the development of America. They cared about their bottom line, their money. And they didn't like that Americans or the colonies or whatever you want to call them at that time were trading without them having their hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. Now, what's going to be the result of this economic downturn is going to lead to another American stepping up and saying we need to change something. And that specific American is Henry Clay. And he's going to develop this American system. And the American system was an economic system along with a transportation system that was designed to get America, quote unquote, back to work, if you want to put it that way. And what he wanted to do was try to convince the North and the South of the country to work together. So even during the 1820s, you can already see there's a huge division between North and South. But if he could get them to work together, they could accomplish a lot. It's one of the reasons that he received the nickname the Great Compromiser. Now, the three main policies of his American system was, number one, protective tariffs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Building new roads and canals to link the states, and establishing a second bank of the United States. Now, a protective tariff was designed to protect American goods. Basically, what it means is that if something is shipped from Britain, let's say that it's an iPhone, and let's say that iPhone costs $10 to make in Britain. Well, they send it over to America, and they want to make $5 off of it. Well, then they have to sell it for $15 to make $5 off of that iPhone. Well, let's say they also make iPhones in America, and it costs them $10, and they want to make a $5 profit. Well, when you go to the store Which one are you going to pick? You might pick the American-made one. You might pick the British-made one. It doesn't really matter because they're the same price. Now, what the protective tariff is designed to do is it adds a tax to that British iPhone that's imported, to where now for them to make $5 off of it, they're going to have to charge, let's say, $18 for them to make $5 profit off of it. But the American-made one is still only $15. Which one are you going to choose? You guessed it. You're going to pick the one that's $15. That's what a protective tariff is designed to do. It's designed to promote American-made goods. Here's the problem. It's hurting the South because this tariff of 1816 and the tariff of 1828 both are going to raise these taxes on European goods, and these European nations are exporting agricultural products from the South. And these southern colonies or southern states, they rely on trade with Britain to grow and to function, which is once again going to cause more sectionalism. Because yes, it's helping the North and it's helping these American manufacturers, but it's not doing anything for the South. Now, one other thing that we're going to see form here is the National Road as a part of the American system. It's going to help Baltimore replace New York as a key East Coast port, because now you can transport things along this road without there being any issue. There's no going through woods. It's going to speed up how fast goods can get from East Coast all the way into what we'd consider then the Midwest, or at that point really the West. And then it's also going to add another set of jobs and things that people can go out and do. Now, one issue with that is, how are we going to pay for these roads? The same way we pay for them today, through taxes. And so along with the roads, there's also going to be the development of canals. And these canals were mainly built in the north, and they were to connect the ocean to the Midwest. And there's going to be a lot of success. The problem is they're very expensive, and it takes a long time to build them. However, it does connect the West and New York City. You're going to see a lot of these canals connecting to the Great Lakes, which is going to speed up transport of goods between New York and the rest of the state and other areas along the northern part of the United States. And it's going to lower shipping costs because it doesn't take as long to get things place to place, as well as they can ship things that they never could ship before because there's not as much, I guess you could say, trouble shipping. There's not as much danger to it. They hand dug over 363 miles of canal, and it was finished by 1825, and it's going to help the American economy grow greatly. Now, here's a picture of just the canal system. There's no current on a canal. If you got onto a canal, the water is designed to be as calm as possible so that ships could go either way, because during this time they didn't have an engine which would allow them to travel upstream or downstream, which was the whole point of a canal. All right. Now, one of the last things that we'll talk about is the National Bank. And the National Bank was designed because we needed a national currency. There was no dollar bill during this time, so to speak. There had been paper money, but there had never been a government organization that had really created a national currency. So the National Bank forms, and this forms under Washington. Then that charter runs out, and so under Henry Clay, he once again trying to promote the economy being stabilized, which means your banks have to be stabilized, and so he wants to create the second bank of the United States. All right, and we'll talk more about the National Bank and its involvement in American society. So here are your 3 questions for the day. Please make sure you get those answered, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Make sure to take down your vocabulary, and I'll talk to you soon.